The Cactus Cult. Written and narrated by Comish. Chapter 1. Fennec was sound asleep inside her small desert den when she awoke to footsteps pacing back and forth in the dirt right next to her. A voice whispered into her left ear, "Follow." Fennec's eyes popped open as she bolted up on all fours, convinced that someone had broken into her den. She frantically scanned the dark and sniffed at the air, but no one was there. Fennec growled as she dashed to the entrance and peered out into the desert night. She spotted a silhouetted figure atop a nearby dune and watched as it moved down to the other side, out of sight. "Hey," Fennec barked out into the night. "Who do you think you are breaking into my den?" She sprang from her small home and charged towards the top of the dune where she last saw the figure. When she reached the crest of the dune, the figure had vanished and left no visible tracks in the sand or scents to detect. The wind picked up as Fennec stared off into the darkness of the dunes, unsure of what she had just witnessed. "I have to stop eating so much before I go to bed. These dreams are getting too realistic," Fennec thought. As she turned around to head back to her den, she let out a gasp. The figure stood in front of her and just a few tail lengths away. "What do you want?" Fennec asked. "Why are you sneaking up on me?" She dug her paws into the sand and prepared to run if necessary, or fight. The figure moved closer towards her and revealed itself, a bobcat. The bobcat's eyes were pale white and held no pupils. Its body emanated a translucent mist that swirled up into the night sky. Fennec let out a growl and dug her paws deep into the sand. "Follow," the bobcat said with a hollow voice that held a deep and cold echo. The bobcat took another step forward as it passed through Fennec's body, only to reform behind her before it continued along its path. Fennec blinked in shock, only to find that the bobcat had already reached the crest of a far-off dune, as if teleported by magic. "Hey, slow down. What's going on?" Fennec yelled. "How did you do that?" More curious than afraid, Fennec chased after the bobcat, determined to find out more. She did not take her eyes off the bobcat as she ran across the night sands towards it. The bobcat did not acknowledge Fennec as she caught up with the mysterious creature. She noticed the bobcat had many wounds and cuts that would give off flecks of light that would illuminate the mist that perpetually surrounded its body. Fennec had never met a bobcat before and wasn't sure how they were supposed to act or anything about their natural temperament. However, even in her ignorance, Fennec could tell something about this creature wasn't normal. "Are you okay? Do you need some water or food? Are you lost?" Fennec asked. The bobcat gave no heed to Fennec's questions and kept moving across the sand. Fennec kept following the bobcat, not sensing anything dangerous. Fennec began to find herself amused by the bobcat's odd and focused demeanor. She even started to emulate the bobcat's gait and cold forward stare, mimicking its movements as she followed along. Fennec didn't realize how far they had traveled until they reached the edge of the dunes, where the soft white sand gave way to the deadlands. A harsh place where survival was as hard as the ground, and red rock plateaus reached high into the sky like giants frozen in time. The brutal landscape was unforgivable for the few creatures who endured the conditions, nothing like the soft dunes where Fennec lived. Despite the danger, Fennec thought it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. The many plateaus were more massive and colorful than any dune she had ever seen back home. The mist emanating around the bobcat's body began to culminate and swirl high into the air as the two looked out across the deadlands in silence. "I've never been this far out. How beautiful. Is this what you wanted to show me?" Fennec asked as the bobcat remained silent. After several moments, Fennec yawned and looked back towards the dunes and her home. She had followed this odd creature a long way, and morning would soon come. "Looks nice, but I'm going to go back home now. Thanks for showing me this view," Fennec said to the bobcat. who continued to ignore her while it stood up and entered the Deadlands. Fennec watched the bobcat and cocked her head to the side. "Where are you going?" she called out in vain. What could be out there? Fennec thought as she stepped out onto the Deadlands. She again caught up with the bobcat, now committed to finding out where this creature was going. A cold wind blew across the Deadlands, and the countless sharp rocks that littered the ground made it difficult for Fennec to walk. The bobcat was uninhibited by the terrain, while Fennec kept stubbing her paws. They continued until the dunes were no longer visible behind them. Fennec looked back towards her now faraway den as a strong gust of wind hit her fur. She began to shiver as her curiosity faded with each step. Fennec stopped and watched as the bobcat pressed onward, oblivious to her entirely. "I'm going back," Fennec yelled, her voice deafened by the wind. "Find someone else to follow you." The bobcat kept moving, and Fennec was becoming frustrated by the bobcat's silence. "Stop ignoring me." Fennec ran right in front of the bobcat and began to yell as loud as she could, determined to get the bobcat's attention once and for all. "Can't you hear me?" Fennec yelled at the bobcat, but its pale eyes stared right through her as it continued moving undeterred. "I'm going back to my den. You're on your own," Fennec barked, resentful in the fact that she was led so far away from home for nothing. "I've never met a creature so rude," she continued barking. Fennec turned around to leave, but caught her left front paw on a large, jagged rock. She let out a painful yelp as she fell onto the hard and unforgiving ground. Fennec got back up with a pained expression as drops of red blood from her left paw hit the dirt. She inspected the injury, a small cut but painful nonetheless. Fennec looked up as the bobcat appeared indifferent to her pain. Fennec popped back up on all fours as her anger grew, and the howling cold winds of the Deadlands started to gust even harder. "Can't you even ask if I'm okay?" she barked at the bobcat. "What if I was seriously hurt? Would you even care?" The bobcat did not respond. "Ignore me, huh? Well, ignore this." Fennec growled and attempted to bite the bobcat on the back leg. Her teeth chomped down hard, but all she tasted was air as she kept attacking the bobcat with no success. She swiped her paw and watched as it passed right through the bobcat. Her attempts were futile. Out of breath, Fennec gave up and plopped down to the ground as she watched the bobcat continue along its aimless path. "I hope you get lost out here forever," she barked, still not realizing that the bobcat had been long dead. The howling wind stopped, and a deafening silence took over. To her surprise, the bobcat sat still and did not turn to face her. Fennec picked herself up from the ground and approached the bobcat with caution. Fennec inspected the bobcat as it sat motionless on the hard red earth of the Deadlands, staring ahead with the same blank expression. "What are you looking at?" Fennec asked. The bobcat again said nothing. Fennec got up next to the bobcat and saw a massive stone structure before them. It consisted of 4 gray-colored stone walls that sloped upwards and converged at a singular point at the top. A pyramid. Fennec's eyes widened as she gazed upon the massive symmetrical object. She had never seen anything like it before. "What is that thing?" Fennec asked with excitement. She had forgotten the bobcat's prior rudeness and indifference towards her. The bobcat's body began to fade before turning into a fine mist that blew away with a gust of wind. A look of bewilderment came across Fennec's face as the bobcat had vanished right before her eyes. Fennec looked back at the bizarre structure jutting out of the ground and was mesmerized by its geometric perfection. She couldn't go back home now, not after seeing something like this. Fennec took a deep breath, braced herself, and headed towards the pyramid. Chapter 2. Fennec was born the runt of her litter, and far smaller than her brothers and sisters. However, she was also quick, smart, and brave. She fared far better than her siblings and had established her own den, despite the fact the odds were against her. It had been a struggle for her to survive, and she had developed a tenacious spirit with the confidence of an animal 10 times her size. Fennec's head tilted upwards as she got closer to the pyramid. which was much larger than it seemed further back. She reached the side of the pyramid and took a few curious sniffs as she placed her left paw on the structure. The pyramid's surface was of a light gray stone, smoother than anything she had ever touched before, and held a brilliant shine visible in the moon's light. She sniffed along the pyramid's base and discovered a square hole just above the ground. Without hesitation, she ran up to it and stuck her head inside. It was a narrow vent that led deep into the center of the pyramid. The warm air from inside moved like a gentle breeze as Fennec entered the opening, lowering her ears so she could fit inside. She sniffed her way down the dark and cramped tunnel, curious to see what was at the other end. She began to hear voices and slowed herself down to a sneak, for she wasn't alone inside the pyramid. "The ceremony has failed, and Sabretooth has not risen," boomed a loud voice from the center of the pyramid as Fennec crawled closer. Fennec reached the vent opening and peered into the inner chamber of the pyramid. The chamber was full of bobcats who sat in a circle around a mound of giant bones half buried in the center of the room. The skull that sat atop the pile of the bones had fangs larger than Fennec had ever seen. Her eyes widened as a big tan-colored cat emerged from the shadows of the chamber. He was 4 times the size of the bobcats and had a long tail. "The resurrection has failed. We will have to try again," Puma said as his long tail swayed as if it had a mind of its own. Puma glared around the circle of bobcats that all seemed to be afraid of him. It was obvious who was in charge. "Your rhythmic chants must have been off. I have explained the importance of maintaining the correct pace countless times." Puma struck his large paw down on the dusty chamber floor as the entire circle of bobcats lowered their ears in fear. "Apologies, Master." The bobcats all bowed and spoke in unison as if they were one creature. Fennec watched in fascination from her hiding place above. These are some weird cats, Fennec thought. She had never seen creatures behave in such a manner. I would never listen to someone so mean. Why did they put up with that? Fennec looked at the pile of massive bones the group of bobcats had encircled. The bones looked old but terrifying, and the sheer size of them boggled her mind. She could only imagine what the creature was like when it was alive. I hope that thing was nice, Fennec thought. Puma pointed a sharp claw to one of the chamber walls, upon which were strange carvings and pictographs. The instructions are clear that the chanting must be perfect, or Sabretooth will not rise, Puma said. Sabretooth? Fennec thought. Fennec looked at the pictographs, but could not make any sense of the carvings, scratched throughout the chamber walls. She looked down at her own claws, and wondered if she could even make a small scratch on the hard stone surface. Distracted, Fennec lost her footing and fell to the floor of the chamber below. She let out a small yelp as she hit the ground with a loud thud and coughed for a moment on the dusty floor before she got up. The entire group of bobcats stared at her before they began to growl in unison. Fennec's eyes widened with fear as her ears perked up in alarm. Puma did not seem happy that she had dropped in uninvited. Hi, Fennec said. Spy, Puma roared. The bobcats all arched their back and hissed at Fennec, who was now cornered and bewildered. I'm not a spy. I'll leave right now, Fennec said with a tremble. I'll pretend I didn't see any of this. The bobcats surrounded her and began to close in as Fennec looked around the chamber for a way to escape. She saw an opening between 2 bobcats and darted between them, making her way towards a large rectangular doorway. Puma took a giant leap and landed in front of Fennec to block her escape. Fennec gasped as Puma growled just a tail's length from her face, and with fangs more massive than her own. Fennec turned around only to see the pack of bobcats gathered behind her. She was trapped. Fennec saw the blur of a paw as Puma knocked her unconscious with a hefty swipe. It looks like we have a sacrifice for the next ceremony, Puma said. All the bobcats cheered as Fennec lay on the dusty floor of the pyramid's chamber. Chapter 3. Hawk soared over the pale dunes as he used his keen vision to survey the vast desert for something to eat. Tarantula rode upon Hawk's back, clutching his friend's feathers so he would not fall as they flew high above the dunes. Tarantula had saved Hawk from a snake that ambushed Hawk and tried to inject him with toxic venom several seasons before. The two had been hunting partners ever since. Hawk, who had eaten many spiders in the past, vowed a life debt to Tarantula and would never eat another spider again. Together, they proved to be an effective team, which gave them an advantage in the hunting grounds. Fennec, who was also an avid hunter, frequented the same areas and had become known to the odd duo. They were impressed by her skill and would often invite her to hunt with them. The three of them caught bugs and lizards with ease and were never hungry since becoming friends. However, Fennec liked to hunt alone sometimes and lived by herself, while Hawk and Tarantula were inseparable. "Let's stop by Fennec's den. We haven't seen her in a while," Tarantula said. Hawk looked back towards Tarantula while he flapped his wings. "Sounds good. She can help us sniff out some bugs with that nose of hers," Hawk said. Hawk shifted directions as the desert winds carried them across the sky. Hawk then took a steep dive in altitude towards the ground and tucked his wings back to increase speed. Tarantula held on tight and winced as the wind around them picked up with Hawk's aerial descent. "Take it down easy this time. I almost lost my grip with your last trick landing," Tarantula said. Hawk gracefully swooped down and landed at the entrance of Fennec's den. Tarantula hopped into the sand and scuttled up towards the den entrance. "Fennec, stop being so lazy and come outside. Let's go get some bugs to eat," Tarantula said. Tarantula entered the den and discovered it was empty and quiet. He stepped back outside and scanned the neighboring dunes with his 8 eyes as Hawk picked debris from his ruffled feathers. "She's not here," said Tarantula. "That's strange. She's usually home around this time," Hawk said as he peeked his head inside the empty den. "Maybe she moved and didn't tell us," Tarantula said as the two peered inside the empty hole in the ground that was Fennec's home. Tarantula saw a trail of paw prints yet to be erased by the desert winds. "Look, her paw prints," Tarantula said. He followed Fennec's tracks to the top of a neighboring dune. Once at the top, Tarantula saw that the tracks continued down the other side of the dune, even deeper into the desert. "I think she went this way," yelled Tarantula. Tarantula gazed out across the many dunes of sand as Hawk landed next to him to see for himself. "It looks like her trail goes on for a while," Hawk said as he mimicked Tarantula's deep stare into the desert. "She must have got a scent of something delicious out there. Let's track her down," Tarantula said, already climbing onto Hawk's back. "Can you at least give me a little warning before you latch on like that?" Hawk asked as he meticulously corrected his feathers that Tarantula's many hairy legs had ruffled yet again. "Don't be such a bird. Your questions are holding us up from breakfast. Now giddy up," Tarantula said. Hawk rolled his eyes, flapped his wings, and took flight after Fennec's trail. Once in the air, Hawk noticed that the paw prints went on for quite a ways ahead of them. "She must have left early this morning. Her tracks go on past the horizon," Hawk said as the pair soared above the dunes, casting a small shadow that rippled on the ground below. Fennec's tracks had now extended past her natural territory, and Hawk began to worry. What could have drawn Fennec so far away from her home? Hawk thought, as the two glided through the sky. Fennec's tracks began to grow fainter as the winds now covered sections of her trail with sand. Hawk continued to follow the disappearing prints until they reached the desert's edge, where the soft sands turned into a jagged and twisted landscape of rocky red earth. "The Deadlands," Hawk said, swooping down next to the last few paw prints of Fennec's trail. Tarantula, still mounted on Hawk's back, held a stern gaze. They both knew how dangerous the Deadlands and the creatures that managed to survive there could be. The two shared a glance of concern for their lost friend. "You don't think she went in there, do you?" Tarantula asked. "The prints don't lie," Hawk said. "She could be in trouble." The snake that had attacked Hawk seasons before had come from the Deadlands. An ornery creature whose reptilian scales created a dangerous pattern that lined its back. The snake had caught Hawk off his guard and had wrapped around him, which made it impossible for Hawk to fly away. There was no doubt that the snake would have killed him if it hadn't been for Tarantula's intervention. Tarantula had been bug hunting and was hiding in a hole when he saw the snake attack Hawk from behind. Tarantula leaped from his hiding spot onto the snake's back, biting the snake several times, causing the snake to release his grip on Hawk and slither off in retreat. The creatures of the Deadlands were ruthless and unforgiving. Fennec wouldn't be able to last long there alone. She may still be out there. I don't see any tracks leading back out, Hawk said. We need to go find her. She might need our help, Tarantula said. Agreed, Hawk said as he flapped his wings back up off the ground and crossed over into the Deadlands. The Deadlands was a vast expanse of hard red rocks, tiny sharp pebbles, and massive multicolored plateaus. The two were nervous even flying over the desolate landscape, and worried for their friend who had wandered in on her own. Fennec's trail had gone cold, so Hawk continued to fly along the same directions her tracks were headed before they disappeared. Neither of them had been this far into the Deadlands, and they knew Fennec hadn't either. The surface below was jagged and lifeless as Hawk and Tarantula soared above, the heat of the day growing with each passing moment. In the distance, Hawk could see a strange rock formation coming into view. A pyramid. Look at that, Hawk said. It was impossible to miss the large stone structure jutting out of the surface of the Deadlands. What an odd-looking mountain. Bring us down over there, Tarantula said. He pointed with a hairy leg towards a flat spot next to the structure. The complex shape of the pyramid entranced both of them. Have you ever seen anything like this? Tarantula asked. Hawk landed on the hot red ground next to the pyramid. Never, Hawk said. Tarantula hopped off and rushed over to the base of the pyramid. He placed a leg on the smooth surface, unlike anything he had ever felt before. Hawk, come feel this thing. It's amazing, Tarantula said. Hawk flew over to Tarantula and placed his left wing on the pyramid. Wow, you weren't joking. What kind of rock is this? Hawk said. Their amazement was interrupted when Hawk's eyes recognized Fennec's prints in the soft dirt along the edge of the outside of the pyramid. Fennec's prints! She was here! Tarantula looked down to see the trail of paw prints that led around the corner of the pyramid. Come on, she must be close, Hawk said. They followed the prints that led them to a small square hole on the other side of the pyramid. Fennec must have gone inside this thing. I don't blame her. How curious a structure. I wonder what's inside, Tarantula asked as he peered inside the small square hole. I'm not so sure I can fit inside there. You go ahead. I'll stay out here and look around for more clues, Hawk said. Tarantula gave a quick salute with one of his hairy legs and crawled inside the pyramid. Hawk watched through the hole as Tarantula disappeared down into the pyramid. When Tarantula was out of sight, Hawk looked back towards the top of the pyramid and placed his wing on the smooth surface again. He was mesmerized. What is this thing? Hawk thought in awe. The structure had a captivating presence that confounded him. Tarantula made his way down the dark tunnel until he reached an opening to the large, empty chamber inside. Tarantula peeked out of a small tunnel opening and looked around. He crawled out onto the wall and into the empty chamber. He looked around and saw what appeared to be multiple sets of paw prints on the dirt floor below. Tarantula scaled down the wall until he reached the ground. He picked up a piece of dirt and tasted it. Seems like there were a lot of creatures in here recently, Tarantula said as he tasted another dirt sample. Tarantula continued his inspection and noticed paw prints all over the floor and tufts of fur. He came across a familiar track, one that belonged to his friend Fennec. She was here, Tarantula thought, as he made his way around the chamber looking for more clues. Tarantula made his way to the far end of the chamber, where he found a large square doorway. The doorway led him up and back outside of the main entrance into the Deadlands. He rushed around to the other side of the pyramid, where Hawk still marveled at its smooth surface. Find anything? Hawk asked. He still had one wing placed on the side of the pyramid. She was here, along with others. Come around to the front. You must see the inside, Tarantula said. They made their way towards the front of the pyramid, where the main entrance stood. Hawk entered the pyramid and into the main chamber. He noticed a large pile of dirt was at the center, as if someone had recently buried something there. Prints surrounded the mound, and it had looked like a lot of creatures had been there. Tarantula pointed out a small set of paw prints that belonged to Fennec. "See? Her tracks," Tarantula said as he motioned for Hawk to come and take a look. Hawk inspected the prints with his sharp vision. "Those are her prints, all right, and it looks like there must have been dozens of other creatures in here with her," Hawk said, pointing to the flurry of other prints that covered the dusty chamber floor. Hawk saw a tuft of fur nearby and picked it up with his talons to inspect it. As he held the bit of fur, he realized that it was feline. "Bobcats. I hate bobcats," Hawk said as he clutched the fur tightly in his talons. "That's who the other prints belong to. I'm sure of it." Hawk had dealt with bobcats before, but never on good terms, and had lost count of how many times bobcats had attempted to pounce on him while he preened his feathers or enjoyed a meal. However, he never saw them together as a group. The paw prints indicated that there were several together at once. "Hawk, look at this." Tarantula pointed to a paw print much bigger in size than Fennec's paw or the bobcat's. Hawk's eyes widened as he realized the size of the giant print. "That must be one big bobcat," Tarantula said. His own prints consisted of small dots in the sand. The two stared at the print, the size of which made them nervous. Hawk looked around the chamber and noticed the smooth walls had strange carvings all over them. He struggled to imagine a creature that was able to build such a structure. "What is this place?" Hawk asked as Tarantula paced around the chamber for more clues. "I'm not sure. It's creepy. I hope Fennec got out of here okay," Tarantula said. "I have a bad feeling about this. We have to find her," Hawk said as he headed back out of the pyramid. "Agreed. Let's get out of here," Tarantula said as he followed Hawk back out into the Deadlands. "This place is starting to bother me." Tarantula shook off a chill as he exited the chamber. They sat in front of the pyramid and looked out across the brutal landscape of the Deadlands. Neither of them had any experience navigating the grueling and unforgiving terrain. Off in the distance, the red plateaus and bluffs were sprinkled throughout the horizon. Hawk looked up at a nearby plateau and lowered his wing toward Tarantula. "Climb on, let's get a better view." Tarantula took his mounted position, careful not to ruffle too many of Hawk's feathers. Hawk flew to the top of a nearby plateau that reached high above the ground and provided a vast view of the Deadlands. Far in the distance, the two could see a massive canyon that cut deep into the jagged landscape. "We will start our search there," said Hawk. Chapter 4. "All the sand rats you can eat," was the slogan used to entice struggling bobcats to enlist as recruits in the Cactus Order. A compelling offer when food and water was so scarce in the Deadlands. However, living in such tight quarters with so many other bobcats was not easy for Dry Paw. She had always been a solitary hunter before being recruited as a huntress for the Cactus Order. Dry Paw adapted to the strange rules of the Cactus Order, put in place by the self-proclaimed leader, Puma. No one knew where Puma had come from, or had permission to ask. Puma ruled the Cactus Order with a heavy paw, and insubordination was not tolerated. Those who followed the rules of the Cactus Order fared far better than those who refused to obey. The Cactus Order's camp was at the bottom of a canyon by a small river that never went dry. The canyon wall had dozens of natural caves that provided shelter and shade for the bobcats from the harsh climate of the Deadlands. The beach in between the river and the canyon wall was where the bobcats gathered to receive orders, rations, and access to the river. Running water was rare in the Deadlands, and the Cactus Order controlled the only source left. These conditions allowed the Cactus Order to thrive, and no creature would dare contest the encampment. Wayward animals that tried to steal a drink from the river did not fare well. The Bobcat River Guards, who protected the precious resource from outsiders, saw to that. Puma had raised an army that he used to control the Deadlands. Bobcats that once roamed alone were brought together by the mighty paw of Puma. Each member was required to pledge their loyalty and contribute by meeting daily hunting quotas. They would hunt sand rats, bugs, snakes, or any creature that was unlucky enough to cross the path of a Cactus Order hunting party. The food, water, and protection offered by the Cactus Order's encampment was hard to pass up if you met the requirements of being a bobcat. However, Drypaw had never liked Puma. She tolerated his cruel leadership so she could survive. Puma was insane with power, yet his subordinates adored him, or at least pretended like they did. They had all seen what had happened to those who angered him. Sometimes severe punishment was given to those who made minor infractions, like repeated low hunting quotas or an unkept cave. Then there were the crazy stories that Puma had convinced the bobcats were true, that he alone was the guardian of an ancient secret that only he had the power to unlock. It captivated the other bobcats, but to Drypaw, it was nonsense. Puma had discovered remains of what he called a saber-tooth, the fossilized bones of an ancient cat more massive than any other creature alive, buried inside an old pyramid. He also claimed that he could read the markings that were scratched in the walls of the old structure. Puma had come across the fossils long ago when he first came to the Deadlands. He became obsessed with decoding the carvings on the walls of the pyramid. Puma claimed that when translated, the carvings indicated that if Sabretooth could be resurrected, he would bring back water to the Deadlands. The only way to do so was to offer a sacrifice through an elaborate ceremony. Puma tried, but the ceremony never worked. Puma didn't fully understand the mysterious carvings, and the many failed attempts to bring the long-dead fossils back to life proved it. Every time the resurrection ceremony failed, Puma would get angry and impatient, often blaming his bobcat subordinates. He gave no regard for the life of the sacrifices, which was often a lizard or a bird taken from the Deadlands, or even sometimes a member of the Cactus Order. Drypaw thought Puma was crazy and didn't care about resurrecting some big dead cat at all. To her, it seemed ridiculous. She never spoke to anyone about her disdain for their leader, and why would she? She wouldn't have been able to survive without the Cactus Order or the river. She disagreed with everything the Cactus Order stood for, but she had no other option. She had long given up the idea of setting out on her own and reserved herself for a life of silent compromise. Drypaw and her hunting party had just returned to camp, with their sand rat count exceeding the quota requirement. Drypaw was one of the top hunters in the Cactus Order, and her team always did well. "Here we go, 13, Drypaw said, as the members of her hunting party piled up a stack of dead sand rats in front of the rat counter. 13 it is. Another good hunt, Drypaw. Very nice," the rat counter said as he inspected the rats for size and quality. "Everyone else's numbers have been on the decline, but yet again, your crew has held steady. What's your secret?" Drypaw shrugged. "It's not easy. Seems like the sand rats are getting smarter and digging their holes deeper," Drypaw said as she began to walk away from the rat counter and the many piles of dead sand rats. "Don't you want your share? You're owed half a sand rat," the rat counter said. "No thanks, you take it. I'm not hungry," Drypaw said as she headed towards the dozens of caves carved out the side of the canyon wall. Drypaw didn't believe that those old bones could ever be anything more than just that, while the other bobcats thought that one day Sabretooth would rise and repay them for all their loyalty. Drypaw often wondered if Puma even believed it himself. Perhaps it was just a lie he used to control cats smaller than himself. She knew none of it could be true, but it didn't matter. The lie was bigger than her, so she played along. And it wasn't all bad. At least she had a cave to herself. "Your life will be much easier if you keep your thoughts to yourself," Drypaw's mother's voice often echoed in her head. "No one will bother you if you just tell them what they want to hear." It was advice that had served her well, for those who spoke their minds in the Cactus Order did not last long. Several bobcats congratulated her as she followed the worn path to her cave. Word had spread of her team's bountiful hunt, as it often was. Drypaw passed occupied caves, where other bobcats slept in shifts between hunting and other duties. It was starting to get dark, and the canyon air was getting cold when she reached her cave. Once inside, a low voice came from the dark back half of the cave. "Drypaw, I presume?" Puma asked. He had made himself right at home in her cave. Startled as she was, she did not show it. The Cactus Order consisted of almost 100 bobcats, and Puma had never personally addressed her, although she had heard him speak at mandatory and frequent speeches that he would give down by the river. "Yes, master," answered Dry Paw, making sure to address him with respect and to sound less startled than she was. Her orders came from other bobcats that held higher rank in the Cactus Order, but never directly from him. There were times when Dry Paw wondered if she even knew that she existed, which is what she preferred. Dry Paw had always thought Puma's obsession with Sabretooth and the pyramid to be unnatural. It seemed doubtful that the lost knowledge he claimed to have held any merit. However, he was faster, stronger, and smarter than any bobcat. His stature was intimidating, and no bobcat alive could challenge him. Some of the bobcats were fanatical about Puma's plans to create what he deemed a utopia in the Deadlands. They were true believers and enforcers of his will, never to question their beloved leader. The fact that he was waiting in her cave was not a good sign. Maybe she hadn't acted enough like a true believer, and maybe he had caught on to her doubts. "The rat counter tells me you're quite efficient," Puma said as he sat upright. His tan tail swayed behind him like it had a mind of its own. "Your hunt numbers more than double that of your cohorts. Very impressive." Dry Paw sat across from him and tried to act like she wasn't afraid as she respectfully bowed her head. "Thank you, master. I just had a lot of practice as a kitten. I am grateful to contribute to the Cactus Order." The most dangerous creatures are the intelligent ones. It is not difficult to best a slower, smaller, and stupider creature. However, when you add intelligence, it can change everything. You are much more than a mindless hunting machine, Archie Dry Paw. "I guess it's just my stalking technique, that's all. I'm nothing special, just lucky," Dry Paw said. "Don't be modest. A skilled hunter like you can be useful to me," Puma said as he stood up on all fours. He began to pace back and forth in the small cave, his large eyes locked on Dry Paw. "Why did I have to catch so many sand rats? It was stupid for me to do anything that would have made me stick out like that," Dry Paw thought to herself. Puma moved next to Dry Paw and sat down right in front of her. Dry Paw hid her fear well. The leader of the Cactus Order was the most dangerous creature in the Deadlands, and she wouldn't dare show any weakness. "I'd like for you to join my personal guard. Perhaps educate the half-wits that surround me with that stalking technique of yours," Puma said. "I need more creatures that I can trust around me, Dry Paw. What do you say?" Dry Paw knew that there was only one answer to Puma's offer, and even though his very presence terrified her, to refuse would likely lead to punishment, or worse, sacrifice. "We are so close to unleashing the power of Sabretooth and the water he will bring. With it, we will be able to extend our control beyond the Deadlands, and the Cactus Order will become unstoppable," Puma said. Dry Paw had heard him say the same thing countless times in his long-winded public speeches. He was always preaching about this Sabretooth like a divine deity. Dry Paw figured he had just made it all up. The whole story seemed like a lie. The only thing that gave Puma any power was the bobcats that blindly followed his commands. Dry Paw bowed. "Yes, master." "You're now a member of my personal guard and only take orders from me, understood?" Puma said. Dry Paw bowed again. "Yes, master, of course." "Excellent. Come to the Cactus Garden tomorrow at first light. You won't be hunting sand rats anymore. I have a different use for you," Puma said as he exited the cave and meandered down the stone walkway. Some of the neighboring bobcats peeked out of their caves as he passed by. As soon as Puma was gone, Dry Paw let out a large sigh and plopped to the floor of her den. She thought having high rat counts would keep her out of trouble, but it only made her stand out like a sore paw. Dry Paw stayed awake in her cave that night and wished she had never joined the Cactus Order. Chapter 5. The sun rose and illuminated the canyon wall opposite of Dry Paw's cave. The morning light bounced off the red rock and created a bright orange glow that caused Dry Paw to squint her eyes. Exhausted, Dry Paw let out a yawn and stretched before she made her way towards the Cactus Garden. The garden was atop a nearby plateau, the top of which could not be seen from the canyon below. Only a few bobcats, known as the gardeners, were allowed to see the cactus garden. The gardeners were responsible for maintaining the garden and lived separately from the rest of the cactus order. Drypaw couldn't imagine what was so special about it and never cared enough to wonder. Puma had claimed that great secrets were kept there, of which Drypaw had her doubts. She figured that it was just another way Puma could manipulate those underneath him. Others would have seen the invitation as a high honor, but for Drypaw, it was a nightmare. The neighboring bobcats remained asleep as Drypaw walked past their caves up the path out of the canyon. She exited the canyon and headed towards the base of a large red and orange plateau. She walked over and looked up the side of the gigantic rock formation. There was no way she'd be able to climb such a steep face. She walked along the bottom of the plateau's cliff and looked for a way up. It would have been nice of Puma to give her some directions on how to get to the garden. She walked around to the opposite side of the plateau and discovered a steep and narrow path. She placed a paw onto the path, took a breath, and began her ascent. Once at the top, the cactus garden came into view, and it was more impressive than Drypaw had predicted. The cacti were all planted in perfect concentric circles that grew smaller towards the middle. Several gardeners milled about the many rows of the tall, green-skinned, needle-covered cacti. The gardeners paid no attention to Drypaw's presence and seemed to be busy tending to their duties. Drypaw noticed that the gardeners had many open cuts and scars. One was even missing an eye. They looked tired and wounded from hard labor around sharp cactus needles. To tend to the sacred garden was a high honor reserved for only the most loyal of the cactus order. It looked like torture to Drypaw, and she hoped that this wasn't her new job. The scale of the garden was impressive, and it perplexed Drypaw how symmetrical and manicured it was. Giant concentric circles that consisted of hundreds of cacti, all of which maintained at the same height, and each one covered in razor-sharp needles. Drypaw was impressed by the spectacle, even though the maintenance of a cactus garden of this magnitude seemed absurd. Drypaw started to walk around the outer edge of the circle of the cacti. She looked towards the middle, but the center was not visible. Behind the countless stalks and arms of the cacti, Puma was not present. "Excuse me, Puma told me to come up here. Is he around?" Drypaw asked a gardener who was busy collecting fallen needles around the stalks of the many cacti. The gardener ignored the question as if Drypaw wasn't even there. "Don't bother with them. The gardeners have taken a vow of silence to focus their energy on their duties," Puma said. He had appeared behind Drypaw without her sensing his presence. "I do relish in the silence." Drypaw wasn't easy to sneak up on, but Puma had done it twice. After all, he was top of the food chain. No matter how good a hunter Drypaw was amongst the other bobcats, she could never take on Puma alone. His skills were unmatched, and Drypaw knew to challenge him would be foolish. "I've only heard stories about this place. I can't believe how massive it is. How long did it take to cultivate this?" Drypaw asked, trying hard to sound neutral and unafraid. Puma looked at Drypaw with intense eyes. "Don't ask questions about the garden. The sacred nature is beyond your scope," Puma said. "You are here to be my personal guard, so you must be shown the purpose of the garden. You are not to repeat what you see here. If you do, you will be punished. Understand?" Drypaw was terrified when she bowed down to Puma and accepted his terms. "Follow me, Drypaw," said Puma as he walked past Drypaw and along the outer ring of the cacti growing atop the red plateau. Drypaw looked down to the deep canyon that the cactus order called home far below. Drypaw followed Puma until they reached the opposite side of the garden. There was a cleared path that led to the direct center of the garden. Puma entered the pathway between the cacti and walked towards the middle. As Drypaw entered the garden, she stuck her side on a protruding cactus needle. She quickly jumped back from the sudden pain inflicted by the sharp point. She looked to her side and saw a small drop of blood in her fur. The wound wasn't deep, but Drypaw was surprised how easily the needle pierced her hide. Puma continued towards the middle of the garden as Drypaw licked her wound and caught back up with him. The surrounding cacti towered over both of them as the two reached the center of the garden. The center was empty except for a solitary cactus plant that was unlike the others. The cactus at the center was gray and black, as if it had been burned to a crisp. Its needles were long, wispy, and crooked. Drypaw stared at the odd cactus and began to shiver as a swirling mist started to emanate from its needles. She became entranced as a low, muttering voice began to growl inside her head. The longer she stared into the cactus, the louder the muttering got. Drypaw forced herself to look away. She felt a chill escape as the muttering in her head ceased. "Behold, the sacred cactus," Puma said. "Long ago, when I first came to this harsh landscape, I struggled to adapt. Life here was miserable, and I was near death when I found this cactus. It spoke to me and told me ancient secrets of the land. Its voice led me to the pyramid and the saber-tooth that lay dormant inside. It told me to raise an army and raise Sabertooth from the dead. With the wisdom of the cactus, I was able to survive. Then I was able to unify the Bobcats of the Deadlands, giving them hope and a real future. The cactus whispered to me the language on the walls of the pyramid. I could then translate the instructions on how to perform the ceremony of resurrection. Sabertooth was a god from another dimension, revered by an ancient species that has long since vanished from these lands. His power is inconceivable and will make the river flow deep again. Under our control, he will take the Deadlands into a new age. Not even I fully understand the magic of the sacred cactus, but it had given me great power, and I will stop at nothing to carry out its commands." Drypaw was afraid to look at the cactus again. She had always thought Puma was crazy, but now she wasn't sure of anything. Maybe he was telling the truth. The sacred cactus begs for sacrifice, and when finally appeased, we can use its power to put flesh back on the bones of Sabertooth. I have tried many times, but each attempt has failed, and the sacred cactus's demands of sacrifice grow louder. Once we perfect the ritual, the cactus order will become unstoppable. Drypaw was shocked. She had no idea there was any truth in Puma's speeches, but this cactus had a power that she could not explain. And even though she no longer looked at the sacred cactus, the muttering in her head began again. "Drypaw, I need you to be the one to conduct the sacrifice. The instructions say that only a creature of true honor and worth should spill the blood of the sacrifice. The Bobcats I have selected in the past have all failed me," Puma said. Drypaw gulped. She wasn't sure she could hurt a creature based on the insane whispers of a magic cactus. And what if she failed as the previous ceremonies had? She looked again at the sacred cactus, and the muttering in her head grew louder. She turned away, disturbed, and felt as if she had grown tired just from looking at it. "Follow me, Drypaw. I must show you something," Puma said as he turned away from the sacred cactus and headed out towards the center of the garden. As Drypaw walked away from the sacred cactus, the muttering in her head grew quieter. They exited the cactus garden, and Drypaw was forever changed. She now questioned everything. Puma led her past the gardeners and back down to a hidden cave at the bottom of the plateau. Puma went in first as Drypaw followed. Once inside, Drypaw saw a desert fox, unconscious, on the floor. "This is the sacrifice for the next ceremony. You will guard the creature until it is time," Puma said. Drypaw looked down at Fennec's dusty and ruffled fur and wondered where the poor creature had come from, and what horrible luck it had been for it to cross the paths with the cactus order. Drypaw looked at Puma and bowed her head. "Yes, master, I will not fail you," Drypaw said. "Excellent. I will return when it is time," Puma said as he left Drypaw alone with Fennec in the small cave. Chapter 6. Hawk and Tarantula flew over the Deadlands and headed towards the canyon. Various paths and trails between the pyramid and the canyon were visible from above. The rough terrain was riddled with cracks and crevices. Being able to fly over them was a huge advantage, and the two made good time. "Can you see any signs of Fennec yet?" Tarantula asked. "There's a lot of worn paths headed this way," Hawk said. "I don't see much else." It wasn't long before the canyon came into full view. A bright glint of light hit Hawk's eye from the bottom of the canyon. "Water, down in that canyon. I'll double back around the other side so we can get a better look," Hawk said as he took a sharp turn and flew closer to the canyon. "It's a river," Hawk said. "I've never seen so much water. Do you think we can get a drink?" Tarantula asked. Hawk perched on the edge of the canyon, and the two stared down into the river below. They saw an encampment on the river's beach, full of bobcats milling around. Some drank from the river, while the others ate sand rats. "I don't think so. It looks like we found the bobcats that made all those prints," Hawk said. Hawk and Tarantula were far enough away not to be noticed by the unsuspecting bobcats. Hawk lowered his body, careful not to stick out, and Tarantula hopped onto the ground. I hope Fennec is all right. These bobcats don't look nice, Tarantula said. They have to know something. We need to get a closer look without being spotted, Hawk said, as he saw several bobcats that appeared to be on the lookout for intruders. I have trouble dealing with one bobcat, let alone this many. Tarantula stretched his legs and nodded in agreement. I'll go in and take a closer look. They would see you flying right away. Keep an eye on me in case I get into trouble, Tarantula said as he started to climb down the vertical face of the canyon. This is a steep drop. Promise you'll catch me if I fall? Do me a favor and try to be serious for once. I'd rather not have to grab you out of the air, Hawk said. Oh, lighten up, Hawk. I was only joking. Just watch my back, Tarantula said as he gripped onto the rock wall with his legs. Hawk was concerned by how many bobcats were there in the canyon. Inspecting the camp was going to be dangerous, and even more dangerous if they got caught. I hope it's not too late, Hawk thought as he watched Tarantula scale the canyon. Tarantula made good time as he crawled towards the river below, which looked like it had once run much deeper. Tarantula was an expert climber and blended in well with the canyon wall. He stopped when he got towards the bottom. 2 bobcats took turns drinking from the river, unaware that Tarantula watched them from the wall above. Did you hear about the new sacrifice? One of the bobcats asked as the other drank from the river. Not another one. Now we have to do the ceremony again? One bobcat said as they took turns drinking from the river. I guess it's going to be a fox this time. It's being guarded in a cave on the other side of the plateau as we speak. They have Fennec, Tarantula thought as he turned around and headed back up towards the top where Hawk was waiting. Hawk looked at the many caves along the opposite wall of the canyon where the bobcats took residence. He could see bobcats up and down the walkways that led in and out of the caves. A bustling camp indeed, Hawk thought as Tarantula arrived back up at the top of the canyon, out of breath. That was fast. Did you see anything? Asked Hawk. Fennec is being held prisoner. I overheard 2 bobcats talking. They're going to sacrifice her, Tarantula said. Sacrifice? Hawk asked. Hawk knew bobcats were dangerous on their own, but an entire group would be impossible for the 2 of them to take on by themselves. We have to find her and get her out of here, Hawk said. I overheard the bobcat say she's being guarded in a cave on the backside of that plateau above the canyon, Tarantula said as he climbed back on Hawk's back. Hawk spread his wings and took off to the other side of the canyon. He flew up high as to stay out of the sight of the bobcats below. It did not take long to reach the other side of the canyon, and once near the plateau, they both got a good look at the cactus garden on top. Look at that, Hawk said. Tarantula looked down and saw the cactus garden made of dozens of cacti arranged in perfect circles. What do you think it is, Hawk? Tarantula asked. I don't want to know, Hawk said. They flew down to the ground and took cover behind a rock formation as not to be seen. They both scanned the plateau as they peeked out from their hiding spot. There, Hawk said. He had spotted a small cave towards the base of the backside of the plateau. That has to be where she is. I don't see any other caves on this side. I'm going in. Keep your eyes on me. I will give you the signal if I need to be pulled out, Tarantula said. You got it, Hawk said, as he stayed hidden behind the rock formation. Tarantula crawled across the dusty red surface of the Deadlands and made his way to the cave. The cave entrance was jagged, and the cave was more like a pit, perfect for holding prisoners. Tarantula snuck along the wall to the entrance of the cave and peeked inside. As he clung to the wall, he saw Fennec unconscious at the back of the cave, guarded by a lone bobcat. She's here, Tarantula thought. Tarantula entered the cave with a slow crawl as he stayed undetected amongst the shadows and made his way onto the ceiling. Drypaw did not sense Tarantula as he passed right above her head. She stood guard at full attention but did not notice his presence at all. Tarantula crawled until he was above Fennec, where he looked down at his imprisoned friend. It appeared that she was still breathing, which was a good sign. However, he couldn't get closer without being seen, and the bobcat on guard did not seem to be going anywhere soon. Hawk watched from outside as a large tan cat with a long tail headed towards the cave. That's no bobcat, Hawk thought. A bobcat was one thing, but this cat was giant compared and looked far more dangerous. Puma stopped and sniffed around the cave entrance as if he could sense something. Puma then scanned around the surrounding area, but failed to see Hawk, who ducked his head down behind the rock formation. Puma turned back and entered the cave. Get out of there, Tarantula, Hawk thought. Tarantula froze as Puma entered the cave. The size of the cat terrified him. Another one? She's too well guarded. I have to get out of here, Tarantula thought. He snuck back out on the ceiling of the cave in retreat, almost grazing Puma's head as he escaped undetected. Back outside, Tarantula ran down the wall and onto the ground as he lifted his two front legs to signal his friend. Hawk flew over and picked Tarantula up off the ground in his talons, and the two flew off high into the sky where they circled above. She's in there, alive but not conscious, Tarantula said. Good thing you got out of there when you did, Hawk said. We're going to have to come up with a better plan. Chapter 7. Drypaw sat in the cave next to the unconscious Fennec, bored from her guard duty. She wished she was out hunting instead. This small creature is supposed to be substantial enough to raise that giant skeleton? Ha! Drypaw laughed out loud. Fennec stirred and coughed up some dust as she regained consciousness. Fennec's eyes widened when she saw Drypaw. It's you! You were the one that was in my den earlier. Drypaw looked at the now awake captive. You're not supposed to be talking, Drypaw said. Why did you lead me out here? What do you want with me? Fennec asked as she sat up unafraid and impatient for answers. Shut up, Drypaw said as she growled in Fennec's face. Fennec winced but stood her ground against Drypaw's aggressive posture. What did I ever do to you? Fennec asked. Puma said that you were spying on the sacred ceremony, Drypaw said. Fennec looked closer at Drypaw and noticed that she was in fact a different Bobcat than the one that led her out of her den. I want to go home. You have to let me go, Fennec said. All I know is that I'm supposed to guard you, and you're supposed to be quiet, Drypaw said. Get out of my way, Fennec said, as she tried to pass Drypaw and rush for the exit of the cave. Drypaw pounced in front of her and blocked her escape. Fennec ran into Drypaw, who was much larger than her, and fell backwards. I want to leave, Fennec said, as she got back up. You can't, and you won't be able to get past me either, Drypaw said. I'll find a way out. You'll see. I'm quick, and you won't be able to catch me, Fennec said. How did we catch you the first time if you're so quick? Drypaw asked. Fennec tried again to bolt out of the cave, but Drypaw's claws dug into her side. Ouch, yelped Fennec as Drypaw retracted her claws. Go sit in the back of the cave and wait. If I have to watch you instead of hunt, you're going to behave. Got it? Drypaw said. Fennec was furious that she couldn't get past this cat who was also very quick. She began to pace in frustration and looked for an opening past Drypaw towards the exit. What a tenacious little creature, thought Drypaw. She began to admire the bravery of the small fox that clearly had no idea how much trouble she was in. Who's that big cat? The one with the long tail. He seems like a real jerk, said Fennec. Drypaw rolled her eyes. The small fox didn't know the half of it. Look, I don't like being here either. Do you think I want to spend my day watching some dumb fox in some stinky little cave? The big cat is Puma, and he is a jerk, but he runs things around here. He has got 100 bobcats under his command, so there is no escape, Drypaw said. Why would you do this to me? I want to go home. Can you at least give me some bugs to eat? Fennec said. Drypaw didn't have any food to share, or for herself. Don't you realize that you're a prisoner and soon you're going to be sacrificed, and it won't even matter how hungry you are? Sacrificed? For what? Fennec asked. Will you shut up? Don't make this harder than it has to be. Sit back in the cave and wait. You shouldn't have been spying, Drypaw said. Tears welled in Fennec's eyes as she walked towards the back of the cave and curled into a ball. Drypaw faced the exit and tried to ignore her. Will you stop that crying? Accept your fate with dignity, Drypaw said. I'm just trying to survive out here. Fennec got back up and began pacing around in the back of the cave. I can't believe it. I don't deserve this. Why do you bobcats think you can pick on smaller creatures? And what do you want with them? I have thought the same thing so many times, Drypaw thought as she let out a sigh. Look, I'm sorry. You probably don't deserve this, but it's beyond my control, Drypaw said. Fennec lowered her ears and her face filled with despair. Drypaw started to feel pity for her small captive. This fox seemed smarter than most of the bobcats that were on her hunting team. Drypaw knew the fox didn't deserve it, but she had to follow orders. Drypaw stared out of the cave entrance, doing her best to ignore the feelings of guilt that grew inside of her. She thought back to when she joined the Cactus Order, and how strange and pointless sacrifices were. She understood killing for food, but not for a silly resurrection prophecy. She had accepted the ideology of the Cactus Order, but never believed it to be true. It seemed to work for the other bobcats, and they did accomplish great things with their numbers and organization. Under Puma's command, they had created a community in an area where most creatures would never be able to survive. There was safety in numbers, but their individuality gave way to blind obedience. Each member of the Cactus Order was just another piece in Puma's strange plans to control the Deadlands. Drypaw thought about the many times she had wanted to escape the Cactus Order. She looked back at Fennec, who had fallen asleep in the back of the cave. She must have worn herself out with all that crying, Drypaw thought as she tried to ignore her conscience. Drypaw had always been different than the other bobcats of the Cactus Order, and was a far superior hunter than most of them. She didn't need to be there, and neither did the little fox. Drypaw decided that she had stayed with the Cactus Order too long. She had looked over at Fennec again and nudged her with her paw. "Hey, wake up," Drypaw said as Fennec opened her eyes and looked up at her. "What is it? I'm tired of being woken up by bobcats," Fennec said. "What's your name?" Drypaw asked. "It's Fennec, but what does it matter? You're just going to sacrifice me anyway." Drypaw got up on all fours. "Well, Fennec, I'm Drypaw, and you're not going to get sacrificed because I'm going to get you out of here." "Really?" Fennec said as her tail sprang up. "You'd help me escape?" Drypaw nodded. "Yes, they shouldn't be doing this, but everyone around here is afraid to speak up or too stupid. I've wanted to leave for so long, I wish I'd never joined. It was hard to live out here, and the Cactus Order controlled most of the good hunting grounds and the river. I felt like I had no choice." "How do we get out of here?" Fennec asked. "We'll have to sneak out, but we need to be quick. They may come searching for us." "Puma is a skilled hunter and very fast too," Drypaw said. "Great, let's leave right now," Fennec said. Drypaw stuck her head out of the cave and saw Puma at the bottom of the canyon, headed on the path up towards them. "Wait, Puma's headed this way. He'll be here soon. Go play dead and don't move for any reason," Drypaw said. Fennec nodded and quickly curled into a ball and pretended to be asleep. Drypaw resumed her guard duty at full attention. Chapter 8. After a while, Puma entered the cave. "Is the sacrifice giving you any trouble?" "No, master. I can easily handle this weak creature," Drypaw said with a bow. "It is time. Come, let us go to the cactus garden," Puma said. "I thought we would have more time," Drypaw thought. "Yes, master," Drypaw said. "I will carry the sacrifice," Puma said. He walked over to Fennec and picked her up in his jaws with care. The sacrifice needed to be intact for the ceremony to work. Puma left the cave with Fennec as Drypaw followed behind. Fennec seemed to be playing dead quite well. They took the path that led to the top of the plateau and reached the cactus garden. Fennec opened her left eye to see rows and rows of cacti and got nervous. This doesn't look good, Fennec thought. The gardeners ignored them as Puma carried Fennec to the center of the garden and set her down next to the sacred cactus, which continued to emanate a dark mist that evaporated into the sky. Fennec peeked at the cactus and began to hear disembodied muttering in her head. She quickly closed her eye in fear. Drypaw could hear the muttering too, which seemed to have gotten louder than before. She was also afraid. "How exactly does the sacrifice work?" Drypaw asked. "Patience, you shall see," Puma said as he set Fennec down in the dust. "The Cactus Order would be nothing without the sacred cactus. It is a source of all our power, and soon Sabretooth will walk again. You need to break off one of the needles of the sacred cactus and carry it with you to the pyramid where we will use it to conduct the ceremony," Puma said. Puma looked at the cactus and carefully snapped off one of the sharp and twisted needles in her jaws. Don't stick yourself. You will not wake up, Puma said. Now we must gather the others and make our way to the pyramid where the ceremony will commence. Puma picked Fennec back up in his jaws and headed out of the cactus garden as Drypaw followed with the needle in her jaws. They made their way down to the river bank where the entire cactus order waited for them. Puma set Fennec down and hopped onto a large rock. Members of the cactus order, Puma roared, this is the day that Sabretooth will rise, and you will all be witness to it. Follow me. His Bobcat subjects cheered as he hopped off the rock, picked Fennec up in his jaws again, and headed out of the canyon towards the pyramid. Drypaw followed closely behind. The other Bobcats formed 2 rows and marched behind them. Hawk and Tarantula had been watching from above, helpless against so many. This doesn't look good, Hawk said. How could Fennec get herself into such a mess? I thought she was smarter than that, Tarantula said. They flew behind the caravan of bobcats that headed across the Deadlands in an ordered fashion towards the pyramid. The view of the procession from above was unlike anything the two had seen. These bobcats were abnormal and dangerous. We have to get her away from that big one, Tarantula said. If you would just set her down for a moment, I could dive down there and snatch her up, Hawk said. Fennec opened her left eye again as she dangled from Puma's jaws and looked at Drypaw, who followed behind. The two made eye contact, and Drypaw shrugged apologetically. The 2 rows of marching bobcats began to chant in unison as the pyramid came into view. We won't be able to get her if they go inside, Tarantula said. I'll dive down as close as I can and drop you onto the big cat's neck to distract him. Then I will swoop down and grab Fennec when he drops her. Then I will double back and pick you up, Hawk said. Do you think you can hang on to that big cat for a while? No problem. He won't be able to buck me off, Tarantula said. All right, we have one chance at this. Hang on, Hawk said, as he put his wings back and dove straight towards Puma's head. The two turned into a blur as they sped downwards. Tarantula leapt off Hawk at full speed right above Puma. He held his 8 legs out as he sailed through the air before landing right on the back of Puma's neck. Puma's eyes popped open when he felt Tarantula land on his neck and drop Fennec on the ground. I've been attacked, Puma said as several bobcats went to his aid. Tarantula clung onto Puma's neck as Hawk made his second dive towards Fennec. Protect me and the sacrifice at all costs, Puma said. The bobcats took formation and surrounded Puma, protecting him from all sides. Hawk was too steep in his dive to slow down. The bobcats pounced and dragged him to the ground. Soon after, Tarantula was pulled off Puma's neck by another bobcat and also pinned down. There's too many of them, Tarantula said, as the two were enveloped by bobcats. The bobcats held the two down as Drypaw stood back with the sacred cactus needle still in her jaws. Fennec pretended to be unconscious on the ground and dared not move. Spies, assassins, Puma said as he confronted his 2 attackers. You will pay for that. Take these 2 with us, for they wish to be sacrificed as well. Puma ignored his own fury and picked Fennec back up in his jaws and continued to lead the procession to the pyramid. Once there, the entire cactus order crammed inside the pyramid. Puma set Fennec down and stood in the center of the chamber and unearthed the remains of Sabretooth, with his paws exposing the fossils. Drypaw was by his side with the sharp and twisted needle of the sacred cactus in her jaws. The rest of the cactus order surrounded them. Bring the other 2 here, Puma said. Several bobcats dragged Hawk and Tarantula to the center and left them next to Fennec. Fennec, are you okay? Tarantula said. Fennec's eyes popped open. You guys came to save me, Fennec said. Silence. You 3 have committed heinous crimes, spying, trespassing, and treachery, Puma said, as his eyes narrowed and his fangs revealed themselves. You have disrupted our sacred ceremony, and for that, you will each be sacrificed. The sacred cactus will finally be appeased, and Sabretooth will rise, Puma said. The bobcats that encircled them inside the pyramid began to chant. Let us go, yelled Tarantula, after which a bobcat smacked him with his paw. Bring forth the needle, Puma said, as he looked at Dry Paw and motioned for her to proceed with the ceremony. Now take the needle and stick each of the sacrifices, and the ceremony will be complete. Dry Paw looked down at the needle in her jaws as it started to emanate the same dark mist that surrounded the sacred cactus back at the garden. Dry Paw began to hear the same muttering from before as she headed towards Fennec. Dry Paw took the sharp end of the needle and pointed it towards Fennec. Fennec struggled as she saw the needle. No, Fennec cried, don't. Sorry about this, Dry Paw said. She flipped around and charged Puma, who had dropped his guard, and drove the needle straight into his left paw. Puma cried out in pain as he ripped the sacred cactus needle out with his fangs. What have you done? Puma said, as he knocked Dry Paw through the air with one ferocious swipe. Puma continued to roar in anger as the other bobcats broke the circle to rush to his aid. Puma began to thrash violently and swiped blindly, for the pain from the poison of the cactus needle had increased. The entire cactus order watched in shock as Puma stumbled and cursed as the sacred cactus's poison took the effect. The preoccupied bobcats forgot all about the 3 sacrifices now left unguarded in all the commotion. Hawk grabbed Fennec and Tarantula, one in each talon, and took off. Fennec looked down and saw Dry Paw unconscious on the ground below. Wait, we have to save her. She saved us, Fennec said. It's too dangerous. We have to get out of here. We will circle above until it's safe, Hawk said, as they flew out of the pyramid. Puma had become weaker from the poison, but angrier than ever. I should have sacrificed you all instead, and maybe Sabretooth would have risen already. You are all useless, Puma roared at the bewildered bobcats. The bobcats were helpless to do anything for their leader. Puma became weak and cursed as he collapsed atop the semi-buried skeleton of Sabretooth. Soon his anger subsided. His breath had slowed, and he had shut his eyes. Puma had died, and the bobcats that surrounded him let out a wail of pain. Their ruthless leader was now gone, and the cactus order was no more. Their mourning was soon interrupted by a faint rumbling from the bottom of the pyramid. Chapter 9. The ground began to shake as pieces of rock and dust fell from the ceiling of the chamber. The pyramid had started to collapse. The bobcats hissed and howled as they scrambled out of the pyramid. Large cracks in the floor opened and swallowed Puma's body into the dirt. Something was stirring below. A giant paw pursed out of the ground. The bobcats still inside panicked when they saw the massive pair of ears and fangs burst from the floor of the pyramid as a gigantic prehistoric cat dug itself out of the ground. The resurrection ceremony was successful, and Sabretooth had risen. Sabretooth was so large his head hit the ceiling of the pyramid that crumbled around him. The top of the pyramid exploded as Sabretooth knocked the collapsing structure out of his way as if it was nothing. The members of the Cactus Order ran in terror from the beast they once worshipped. Too late did they realize how terrible and fearsome Sabretooth was as he swiped his mighty claws and attacked the bobcats. Sabretooth's mindless rampage paid no heed to the loyalty of the Cactus Order, who had brought him back from the dead. Hawk, Tarantula, and Fennec circled above and watched the destruction. Did you guys see that? Fennec said. That cat is gigantic, Tarantula said. I've never seen so many bobcats run so fast. Most of the bobcats were able to escape, but the ones who got caught by Sabretooth's paws were not so lucky. Dry Paw regained consciousness as the commotion continued and looked up to see Sabretooth knock stones and bobcats high into the air. She scrambled to get up and escape, but Sabretooth saw her move out of the corner of his eye. With one giant pounce, he landed on the ground right next to her and knocked Dry Paw down. She looked up to see Sabretooth as he towered over her. She was in shock and unable to move, as Sabretooth glared at her with fangs that were larger than she was. Fennec watched from above in terror. There was nothing she could do. Oh no, the thing is going to get her, Fennec said. Puma had been right. It was all true, all the nonsense speeches, all the crazy ceremonies. Sabretooth was indeed real, although Puma had gotten a crucial detail wrong. All the previous sacrifices had been too small. Puma was and always had been the only one big enough to fulfill the sacrifice. When Drypaw stuck him with the cactus needle, his blood was enough to awaken the ancient evil that was beneath him. Puma said that Sabretooth would be benevolent and grateful after the Cactus Order resurrected him. In reality, Sabretooth was a dangerous and primitive killing machine. Puma had misinterpreted the carvings of the pyramid walls that served as a warning. There was a good reason someone had built the pyramid over Sabretooth's body so long before. Sabretooth looked down at Drypaw and let out a powerful roar. Drypaw closed her eyes and shook with fear. A cloud of mist appeared out of nowhere, and a translucent bobcat covered in scars emerged. Sabretooth turned his attention to the ghost bobcat. Then a second ghost appeared next to the first, then a third. The ghosts of bobcats began to pop up everywhere until Sabretooth was surrounded. They were the ghosts of bobcats who had been sacrificed, poisoned by the needles from the sacred cactus. Sabretooth roared at the ghost bobcats, but they did not move. Drypaw saw her chance and bolted from under Sabretooth and passed right through the circle of ghosts, who paid her no mind. The ghost bobcats began to close the circle toward Sabretooth, who spun around as he tried to face all his enemies who surrounded him at once. Their bodies started to grow until the entire group of ghost bobcats matched the size of Sabretooth. He roared and took swipes at the giant ghosts with his paw, but it passed through them as if they were air. The bobcat ghosts' eyes began to glow as they concentrated their vision on Sabretooth. Beams of bright light emanated from their eyes and struck Sabretooth in his chest. He let out a roar of pain as his fur began to sizzle as the beams from the ghost bobcat's eyes locked on him. Sabretooth's resurrection was brief as a black hole opened up in the ground next to him. The beams from the bobcat ghost's eyes dragged Sabretooth across the ground as he clawed and scratched to break free. The gravity of the black hole began to pull him into another dimension, not meant for the living. Despite his strength, Sabretooth was unable to escape as the beams pulled him into the portal. Sabretooth let out a final roar until he disappeared inside. The portal shut in an instant, and the giant ghost bobcats began to shrink back down. They then fused back together into a single translucent bobcat, the same one that led Fennec from her den to the pyramid. The ghost bobcat approached Drypaw. "Who are you?" Drypaw asked as she looked at the bobcat ghost who was covered in scars and cuts, similar to the injuries she had seen on the bobcats that tended the cactus garden. The ghost bobcat stared at Drypaw before it vanished right before her eyes. She then looked at the pyramid, which had been reduced to a pile of rubble. Hawk, Tarantula, and Fennec landed next to Drypaw, who sat dazed but intact on the ground. "Drypaw," Fennec said as she hopped off Hawk and ran towards her. "Are you okay?" "I think so," Drypaw said as she stood up and shook the dust off her fur, still in shock about what she had witnessed. "Hawk, Tarantula, this is Drypaw," Fennec said. "Hi there," Tarantula said as he waved a single hairy leg. "Hello," Hawk said with a salute of his wing. "Thanks for helping our friend." "It was nothing," Drypaw said. "Where do you think all those bobcats are going to go?" Fennec asked. "Probably back to the canyon. It wasn't such a bad place. But they will be lost without Puma," Drypaw said. "Perhaps you should go back and lead them," Fennec said. Drypaw laughed. "Now why would I want to do that?" "I'll do it," Tarantula said. "No one's going to listen to a hairy spider," Hawk said. "Hey, smarter than all of you. And if I was bigger, I would eat you all up," Tarantula said. "Sorry about all this. The Cactus Order was too powerful, and there was nothing I could do. I had lost control of my own life," Drypaw said. "Where will I go now?" "You can come hang out with us in the dunes if you want. The sand is soft and it's not too hot. Plus, there's all kinds of great bugs to eat," Fennec said. "Maybe it is time for a change of scenery. Would you mind?" Drypaw asked. "Of course not. We could always use another set of paws bug hunting," Tarantula said. "Sounds great. I'd love to," Drypaw said. We'll have to walk back because I can't carry you all, Hawk said. The four friends left the rubble of the pyramid and headed back out towards the calm and peaceful dunes. I was thinking maybe we should start our own order, the Order of the Fox. You guys can bring me bugs while I yell at you all day, Fennec said. That's a terrible idea. No more orders, no more sacrifices, no more giant bobcat ghosts, please, Hawk said as they all laughed. You know what? You're my best friends, Fennec said as they headed back towards the dunes. Little did they know that the bobcat ghost watched them from afar before it vanished into thin air, never to disturb Fennec's sleep ever again. This concludes the Cactus Cult audio version, written and narrated by Paul Comish.